Most people think that bodybuilding training has evolved over time from more basic fundamentals and trial and error to more advanced science-based application. Basically meaning we didn't know much back then, but now with all the science and literature, we're smarter and we know how to train better. But personally, I don't agree with that at all. If we look at the typical bodybuilder, and I'm not talking about Mr. Olympia, guys on enhancements, or genetic freaks. I'm talking about the typical guy that's in the gym 4 to 5 days per week, training hard, looking to build as much lean mass as possible. In the 60s and 70s, even the 80s and 90s, we saw massive guys building their physiques off the basics, plus hard work and consistency, and they all got great results. Today, unfortunately, there's an epidemic of small guys arguing online about RIR, training to failure, and whether or not this training program is optimal for natural or enhanced lifters. The physiques clearly don't represent that now we know more about training. And personally, the way I look at the evolution of bodybuilding training, it's not that we've acquired more knowledge through science and application, but the evolution that I see is that the lifting culture in general has shifted from focusing on effort first to now focusing on shortcuts. I personally always operated with the idea of effort first. Basically, if I didn't know the best way to train, I just knew if I applied the most amount of effort that I could, I would get the best results. There was no way to validate what I was doing was optimal. There was no research or Google searching for that matter for the latest scientific study. It was simply training hard, experimenting, and the question being, am I getting results training this way? And no matter what training system or style of training I did at the time, one thing was always clear. Whichever one I applied the most amount of effort to was the one that got me the best results. Not just me, but again, over time, the physiques, they tell us a story. The guys who built the most impressive physiques back then, even before my time, they all were the hardest workers in the gym. They pushed harder than the average person, and they built above average physiques. Now today, I find guys want that result, but instead of saying, I'm going to train as hard as humanly possible to get that result, they want to know the optimal way to get there. And let me say this right now. There's nothing wrong with being smart about it. There's also nothing cool about training poorly. But the problem that most guys run into is that they overlook the most important aspect of any training program is in fact effort. And they skip over the idea of effort for the new fancy training idea. And unfortunately what happens 6 months to 12 months down the line, they end up frustrated with the results, but again, looking for a new program to follow. And I always tell guys, the person who executes even the most imperfect plan harder than anyone else, more consistently than anyone else, with more passion and effort than anyone else, they will always build more muscle and strength than the guys who think they found the perfect magical plan, who just don't have the same work ethic. So when I tell guys that the basics are what builds muscle, I'm not just saying skip those fancy pull downs, the ones that so-called bias the lats through a specific line of pull, and instead of that, just focus on pull-ups and barbell rows. What I'm saying is those bare bone movements, they're excellent choices, some of the best in my opinion. Don't let anyone fool you on that. You just haven't applied the most amount of effort that you could to get the most out of those movements just yet. And if you haven't done that, all the fancy exercises in the world won't do anything for your physique. And if you haven't trained hard enough to build the strength base to be able to do additional weighted pull-ups, barbell rows with more than your body weight for higher rep sets, and hip hinging 200, 300, or even 400 pounds off the floor, you don't have a programming issue. The issue is not, is this optimal? You in fact have an effort issue. You haven't put the time, work, or effort in to need these fancy ideas. And if you haven't built the physique that you want or reached the muscle size that you're after, you need to go back to the stuff that's been working since the beginning of bodybuilding. You need to apply a high level of effort to your plan. You also need to avoid getting distracted by the new latest and greatest training idea. I promise you this, in the next 5 or 10 years, a new training plan will come out that completely contradicts the way that everyone trains now. But one thing's for sure, the basics will always remain. And if you want the training program that I personally use, and the one that I recommend to build mass, using proven old school bodybuilding training methods, check out all my old school mass gain programs down in the description. And as always, if you guys want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.